Picture this. It's a normal school day, a day like any other. The morning bell rings. Students pour into their classrooms, eager to start their lessons. But for one teacher, that day would turn into something far from ordinary. What she discovered inside a student's backpack would shake her to the core and leave her questioning everything she thought she knew. So, what was inside that backpack? A note? A book? Maybe even a strange lunchbox? No, it was something far more shocking, something no one could have predicted. But before we dive into the mystery, let's take a moment to consider this. What would you do if you were in the teacher's shoes? Would you open the backpack? Or would you hesitate, wondering if you should just leave well enough alone? In this story, you're going to feel like you were right there in that classroom, experiencing every moment with us. So stay with me. You're going to want to see this to the end. Let me take you back to the classroom, where our story begins. The teacher, Mrs. Jennings, had seen it all before. Over the years, she'd been a guiding figure to hundreds of students, from the talkative chatterboxes to the shy, quiet ones who barely spoke up. She was the kind of teacher who knew how to get through to her students, how to make them feel safe, understood, and, above all, valued. But on this day, something was different. One of her students, a boy named Liam, had been acting strangely. He wasn't his usual self. Usually, he was a bit of a joker, always finding ways to make the class laugh, even in the most serious of lessons. But today, there was something unsettling about him. His usual enthusiasm was absent. His eyes seemed distant, almost as if he were hiding something. And then there was the backpack. Liam's backpack was big, almost too big for a kid his size. It was slung over his shoulder as he entered the room that morning, and for the entire first half of the class, it remained on the floor beside his desk. The other students were busy with their work. The room was filled with the hum of pencils on paper, but Mrs. Jennings couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Throughout the class, she noticed Liam glancing nervously at his backpack every now and then. Was he worried about something? Or was it something inside the backpack that made him so uneasy? It wasn't like him to act this way. He was usually the first to crack a joke or jump into a group discussion, but now he was avoiding eye contact and barely speaking. As the class progressed, Mrs. Jennings decided she needed to check on him. She approached his desk and gently tapped him on the shoulder. "Liam, are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with concern. He turned to look at her, his face pale, his lips trembling slightly. "Yeah," he muttered, "I'm fine." But his voice didn't sound convincing. The teacher's instincts told her something was off. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but something in the air felt wrong. She glanced at the clock. The lesson was almost over. But before the bell rang, Mrs. Jennings decided she needed to take a closer look at Liam's backpack. Maybe there was something in there that could explain his odd behavior. Maybe there was something inside that could make sense of his strange silence, his avoidance of the other students. She waited for a moment, trying to gauge the right time. The students were starting to pack up their things, and the noise in the room grew louder. It was now or never. Mrs. Jennings walked over to Liam's desk and bent down to pick up his backpack. It felt heavier than she expected. She could feel her heart race as she unzipped it, the anticipation of what might be inside filling the room. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled open the flap, revealing the contents of the bag. And that's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. Inside the backpack, among the usual assortment of books, papers, and notebooks, was something that left Mrs. Jennings stunned. She froze. Her eyes widened as she stared at the object before her. It was nothing like she had ever expected to find in a child's backpack. The sheer shock of what she saw made her stomach twist. She had never, ever encountered something like this in her years of teaching. And that's when the thought hit her. How had she missed it? How could something so dangerous, so disturbing, be hiding right under her nose? But here's the twist. This was just the beginning. What was inside the backpack would lead Mrs. Jennings down a rabbit hole of secrets, lies, and unexpected truths about Liam, about his family, and about the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary child. And what she uncovered would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about her students and the world they lived in. Now, I'm sure you're sitting there on the edge of your seat, wondering, What exactly was in that backpack? How could something so shocking be hidden in a child's bag? Well, I'm not going to leave you hanging for much longer. In fact, you're about to find out exactly what happened next. Trust me when I say that this story is about to take a turn that you'll never see coming. So, don't go anywhere. Stick around, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. But before I continue, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a split-second decision about what to do with something you discovered? Something that could change the course of everything? What would you do if you were in Mrs. Jennings' shoes? Would you have opened that backpack? Would you have handled the situation differently? Mrs. Jennings stood there for what felt like an eternity, her fingers hovering over the items inside Liam's backpack. Every instinct in her screamed for her to stop, to close the bag and walk away, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She needed to understand what was happening, needed to find out what was so important that Liam was acting like this. As her hand slowly moved towards the object at the bottom of the bag, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just Liam's behavior, it was everything about this situation. Her mind raced back over the past few weeks, trying to piece together the events that had led to this moment. Liam hadn't always been like this. She'd known him for nearly 2 years now, ever since he had transferred into her class. At first, he had been quiet but eager to learn, a bit of an introvert who kept to himself but never caused trouble. He was the kind of student who would finish his work early, then quietly help others with their assignments when needed. It was clear from the start that he was incredibly bright, perhaps too bright for his own good. And that's what made him stand out. Mrs. Jennings had always admired his intelligence, but she couldn't ignore the subtle shift in his behavior. Over the last few weeks, Liam's demeanor had changed. He began to isolate himself from the other students, sitting alone during lunch, avoiding eye contact with his classmates, and becoming increasingly withdrawn. It was as if something, or someone, had shaken him to his core. And that was when the first hint of something unusual appeared. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. Mrs. Jennings had stayed late after class to grade papers, as she usually did, when she overheard a conversation between Liam and another student. Max was one of those kids who always found a way to get into trouble, but his antics had never been anything too serious. That day, however, Liam's voice was different. He was tense, nervous even, as he whispered something to Max that Mrs. Jennings couldn't quite catch. "I don't know if I can do this, Max. What if they find out?" His words lingered in the air long after he had left the classroom. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, attributing it to the usual drama that came with middle school, but now, in the aftermath of what she had found in his backpack, those words took on a darker meaning. What had Liam been worried about? What was he trying to keep hidden? Mrs. Jennings knew she had to dig deeper, but at that moment, she wasn't sure where to begin. She tried to think of the students Liam interacted with most often, but her mind kept returning to Max. Max was always in the background of Liam's day-to-day life, and their interactions seemed to have taken a more ominous tone recently. But what did Max know? Was he somehow involved in whatever was going on with Liam, or was he just another innocent bystander caught up in a situation far more dangerous than anyone realized? Over the next few days, Mrs. Jennings couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She paid closer attention to Max, noting how he seemed unusually interested in Liam's whereabouts and actions. She observed how he lingered by Liam's desk after class, whispering things to him that no one else could hear. And then there was the phone call. A mysterious number had called the school, leaving a voicemail for Mrs. Jennings. The voice on the other end was distorted, but it was clear enough to make her blood run cold. "You're digging in the wrong place, Mrs. Jennings," the message had warned. "Stop before it's too late." The call had come at a time when Mrs. Jennings was already on edge, but it made her all the more determined to uncover the truth. Who was behind this, and why were they trying to intimidate her? As the days wore on, Mrs. Jennings found herself tangled in a web of uncertainty. The more she learned about Liam, the more questions she had. He had been showing up late to school, his clothes were becoming increasingly disheveled, and his once perfect grades were slipping. She even noticed a strange bruise on his arm one morning when he rolled up his sleeve to adjust his jacket. She wanted to ask him about it, to find out what had happened, but something told her it wasn't that simple. Liam wasn't the kind of kid to show vulnerability, and whatever had happened, he was hiding it. But who could blame him? He had been under pressure, and that pressure was building to a breaking point. One afternoon, as Mrs. Jennings tried to piece together the puzzle, she received an unexpected visitor, a police officer. He didn't have a badge or a uniform, but his calm demeanor and the way he carried himself told her everything she needed to know. He introduced himself as Detective Shaw, and his presence added another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. "We've been following some leads about a possible issue involving one of your students," he said, his voice steady. "We need your help to understand what's going on with Liam." Mrs. Jennings was taken aback. "What do you mean? What kind of issue?" The detective's face remained expressionless, but there was a hint of urgency in his eyes. "We believe Liam might be connected to something much bigger than you realize. Something dangerous." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "There's a chance he's in real danger, and if we don't act quickly, things could escalate." Now, Mrs. Jennings was completely out of her depth. She thought she had been merely trying to help a troubled student, but this was something else entirely. Detective Shaw's words echoed in her mind, and the weight of them pressed down on her chest. What could Liam possibly be involved in that would warrant an investigation? Was Max involved? And what about the strange call she had received? Was it a threat? A warning? Or was it someone trying to cover their tracks? The more Mrs. Jennings learned, the less she seemed to understand. Each new discovery added another layer of confusion, each clue pointing in a different direction. And just when she thought she was getting closer to the truth, she found herself further away than ever. Someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Someone who knew more about Liam than she ever could have imagined. And now, it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light, and with it, the consequences of uncovering a secret that was far darker than she could have ever anticipated. So, what was inside Liam's backpack? What did the police know that Mrs. Jennings didn't? And who was pulling the strings behind this tangled mess? The answers were closer than anyone realized, but would they be too much to handle when they were finally revealed? Mrs. Jennings felt a chill creep up her spine as Detective Shaw's words lingered in the air. "Something dangerous," he had said, and the weight of those words was starting to sink in. But what exactly did he mean? She had always believed that teaching was about helping students, guiding them, and being there when they needed someone. But this was something far more sinister, and she couldn't help but feel like the walls were closing in on her. It was as if she had stepped into a world she didn't belong in, a world where secrets were being hidden and dangerous forces were at play. She had tried to do the right thing, but now it seemed like every step she took led her into a darker, more uncertain place. The next day, as she arrived at school, the atmosphere felt different. The usual bustle of students filling the hallways, the chatter, the laughter, it all seemed muffled, distant, like a fog had settled over everything. Mrs. Jennings couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. When she entered her classroom, she was met with a surprise. Liam's backpack was gone. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been there just yesterday, tucked neatly under his desk. But now it was nowhere to be found. Panic surged through her chest. Had Liam taken it with him? Had someone else taken it? And more importantly, why had it vanished so suddenly? She hurried to the office to check if anyone had reported seeing Liam or his bag, but the secretary gave her an odd look. "Liam's not here today," she said casually, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "He called in sick. Didn't you hear?" Mrs. Jennings was taken aback. No, she hadn't heard. She had been too focused on the mystery that was unfolding before her, too absorbed in trying to understand the strange behavior of her student. Liam had never missed a day of school without warning. His absence now felt like another piece of the puzzle slipping away. And then there was the message she had received the night before. The voice on the phone, distorted, yes, but unmistakable, had warned her to stop digging. Whoever had left that message clearly didn't want her to uncover the truth. Was it connected to Liam's sudden disappearance? Was this all part of something much bigger than she could ever have imagined? The day dragged on, each hour feeling like a slow march towards something inevitable, something she couldn't control. She tried to reach out to Max, hoping he could shed some light on what was happening, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Another piece of the puzzle slipping through her fingers. It wasn't until the end of the school day that she finally got the breakthrough she had been waiting for. A colleague, Mr. Green, who had always been a bit of a loner, approached her in the teacher's lounge. His face was tight, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a sense of urgency. "You need to be careful, Mrs. Jennings," he said in a low voice, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "I've heard things. Things about Liam, things about this whole situation." She looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Green's eyes darted nervously as he stepped closer. "I don't know all the details, but I think you've stirred up something that was meant to stay buried. You're in deeper than you realize. There are people involved in this, people who don't want you digging any further." Her heart raced. "What do you know? Who are these people?" He shook his head, stepping back. "I can't say more. Just be careful, okay?" He turned abruptly and walked out, leaving Mrs. Jennings standing in the lounge, her mind racing. What did Mr. Green know? And why had he warned her in such an unsettling way? Had he been trying to protect her, or was he simply trying to cover his own tracks? His words hung in the air like a threat, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Later that evening, as she sat alone in her office, going over everything she had discovered so far, her phone buzzed. It was an anonymous message, the text brief and to the point. "Stop. Before it's too late. Things are more complicated than you think." Her pulse quickened. Who was behind this? Who wanted her to stop asking questions, and why? And what had happened to Liam? She spent the next few hours poring over every scrap of information she could find. She had gone through Liam's school records, hoping to find something that could explain his sudden change in behavior, but all she had found was a blank spot. There was nothing in his history that indicated any problems, no signs of trouble at home, no previous issues with other students. It was as if Liam had come out of nowhere, a quiet, smart kid who suddenly had a dark secret that no one could understand. And then, as she was about to give up for the night, she found it. A letter, tucked into the back of Liam's folder, one she had missed earlier. It was sealed in an envelope, with no return address. Her hands trembled as she carefully opened it, revealing a short note. "If you don't stop asking questions, everything will fall apart. You've been warned." The handwriting was jagged, hurried. Mrs. Jennings felt a surge of fear and frustration. Someone was threatening her now. But who? And why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. It was Detective Shaw. His face was grim as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low. "We've found something you need to see." Mrs. Jennings felt a surge of anticipation. Finally, the answer she had been searching for. But as Detective Shaw handed her a file, her heart sank. Inside, there was a photograph of Liam, and beside him, standing in the shadows, was someone she never expected to see, someone she knew all too well. It was Max. As Mrs. Jennings stared at the photo of Max standing next to Liam, her thoughts whirled in a storm of confusion. She had known Max for years, trusted him as a fellow teacher and a close friend. He had always been there when she needed advice, when she needed to talk about the struggles of being a teacher. But now, seeing his face in that photograph with Liam, the same Liam she had been desperately trying to protect, she felt a sharp pang of betrayal. What was going on here? Was Max involved in whatever dark secret Liam was hiding? Had he been lying to her all along? The detective's presence in her office only seemed to heighten the growing sense of dread. What had he found? How did Max fit into all of this? Detective Shaw's voice broke through her thoughts. "You need to understand something," he said quietly, his eyes focused on the photograph. "Max has been under investigation for a while. We didn't know how deep this went until we started connecting the dots." Mrs. Jennings felt her stomach drop. "Max? Under investigation? For what? What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. "He's just a teacher, a friend. What could he possibly be involved in?" Shaw hesitated for a moment before continuing, his words measured. There's a lot we didn't know about Max. A lot he's kept hidden from everyone, including you. I hate to say it, but it's possible that he's been playing both sides this whole time." As the words hung heavy in the air, Mrs. Jennings felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Max, the person she had always turned to for support, might be hiding a dark side, a side she had never seen, never suspected.
But why?
What could he gain from this? And how was he connected to Liam? Was he working with whoever was threatening her, or was he trying to protect her from the same forces? The questions piled up, and each one felt more unsettling than the last. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again, a sharp, jarring sound that sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. It was a message from Max himself. It read, "Stay away from this. You don't know what you're getting into. I can protect you, but you have to trust me." Mrs. Jennings stared at the message, her mind racing. Why was Max telling her to stay away? Why didn't he want her to dig deeper? What was it he was trying to hide? His words, so urgent, so insistent, sent a shiver down her spine. She looked back at Detective Shaw, who was watching her closely, his expression unreadable. "Max has been trying to warn you," he said, as though reading her mind. "But I think it's too late for that. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than you realize. And Max is not the only one with a secret." The detective's words hit her like a ton of bricks. Max wasn't the only one hiding something? Her pulse quickened as the room seemed to close in on her. She had been so focused on Liam, on the strange behavior of her student and the odd, cryptic messages that had come her way. But now, with Max's involvement and with Shaw's cryptic warning, she had to wonder, who else was involved in this mystery? Who else had been playing a part in keeping the truth from her? And then, as if to further complicate matters, there was a knock at the door, followed by the appearance of someone she hadn't expected, Rachel, a former student of hers, now an intern at the school. Rachel had always been quiet, shy, and polite, someone who had always kept to herself. But today, as she stepped into Mrs. Jennings' office, there was a look in her eyes that Mrs. Jennings had never seen before.
Fear.
Determination. Desperation. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said quickly, her voice shaking. "It's about Liam and Max." Mrs. Jennings felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be? Had Rachel somehow stumbled upon the same clues she had? Had she uncovered something dark about Max that Mrs. Jennings had missed? Rachel took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've seen things," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "Things that didn't make sense at first. But now, I think I understand. Max.
He's not who you think he is.
And he's involved in something much worse than you realize." Mrs. Jennings' heart pounded in her chest. This was getting worse by the minute. The walls were closing in, and everyone around her, everyone she trusted, seemed to be hiding something. The more she learned, the less she understood. How deep did this go? How far was Max willing to go to protect whatever it was he was involved in? And what about Liam? Was he in danger? Was he caught up in something that he couldn't escape from? Rachel's words didn't offer any answers, only more questions. But as Mrs. Jennings listened to her, something about the way Rachel spoke felt off. Like she knew more than she was letting on, like she was holding back something important. Just as Mrs. Jennings was about to press Rachel for more details, her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from an unknown number. It read, "You've been warned. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. Max is not your friend." Her hands trembled as she read the message, her mind racing. Max was not her friend? But who was sending these warnings? And why were they targeting her, someone who was just trying to help a troubled student? The stakes had never felt higher, and every new piece of evidence seemed to pull her deeper into a web of lies and deception. What was the truth? And who could she trust? She glanced back at Rachel, whose face was pale, and then to Detective Shaw, who was still watching her with that unsettling calm. No one was who they seemed to be, and the more Mrs. Jennings uncovered, the more it felt like she was being drawn into a trap, one that she might not be able to escape from. The tension was thick, the uncertainty suffocating, and with every twist and turn, the mystery only seemed to grow darker. The real question now was, Just how far would she have to go to find the truth, and at what cost? The next few days felt like a blur to Mrs. Jennings. She was caught in an endless cycle of tension, fear, and confusion, unable to make sense of the web of lies, cryptic messages, and unsettling revelations that seemed to come at her from every direction. Max's involvement, the mysterious warnings, Rachel's strange behavior, it all seemed to swirl together into a fog of uncertainty that clouded her every move. She was consumed by the nagging feeling that she was being watched, but every time she turned around, no one was there. It was as though the walls were closing in on her, and no matter where she went, no matter how many people she tried to trust, the truth remained elusive. But one night, everything changed. Mrs. Jennings had just left her classroom after a long day, the silence of the empty school hallways echoing in her mind. The building was dark except for the soft glow of the exit signs and the distant hum of the fluorescent lights above. As she walked toward her car, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was the same feeling she'd been having for days now, a creeping sense of being followed. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but there was no one. Just the empty parking lot, the sound of her footsteps ringing in the still air. But then she heard it. A car engine started in the distance, the low growl of the motor cutting through the quiet. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned her head, squinting into the darkness. She couldn't see the car, but the sound of it grew louder, closer, until it stopped just behind her. The headlights flashed on, blinding her for a moment. A wave of panic washed over her as she quickened her pace, walking faster toward her car, her breath coming in short bursts. She fumbled for her keys, her hands trembling as she tried to unlock the door. The engine revved again, and she felt a cold chill run down her spine. Without thinking, she dove into her car and slammed the door shut, locking it in a frantic blur. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she just sat there, trying to calm herself, trying to make sense of what was happening. But as the seconds ticked by, she realized the car behind her wasn't leaving. It was parked just a few feet away, the headlights still glaring in her rearview mirror. Mrs. Jennings' mind raced as she tried to think of a way out of this. Should she call the police?
But what would she say?
Who would believe her when all she had was a feeling that someone was after her, that something terrible was about to happen? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. "They know. They're watching you. You need to get out of there now." Her stomach dropped. What did Rachel mean? Who was watching her? It felt like the walls were closing in, and she was trapped. The car behind her didn't move, and she couldn't see who was inside. Every instinct in her body screamed that something was wrong, but she didn't know what to do. The only thing she knew for sure was that she wasn't safe. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the car's headlights shut off. The engine quieted, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breathing. Mrs. Jennings didn't dare move, her heart thumping painfully in her chest. It was as if the world had stopped around her, and she was holding her breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. She glanced at her phone again. This time, the message was from Max. "I told you to stop. This is bigger than you think. You're in over your head." Her mind reeled. Max, the man she had trusted, had warned her over and over again to stay away. Why had she ignored him? Why hadn't she listened? What was she really involved in, and how far did it go? As she sat in the car, frozen, her phone buzzed once more. A call this time. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, her mind filled with the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days. But something in her gut told her this wasn't just another message. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She answered the call. A voice, low and distorted, crackled through the speaker. "You've been warned," the voice said, cold and deliberate. "You should have listened to Max. Now, you're going to regret it." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mrs. Jennings with nothing but the eerie silence of the parking lot. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone, her chest tight with panic. The feeling of being watched intensified, and for the first time, She realized how completely alone she was in this. Without warning, the headlights of the car behind her flickered back on, and the engine roared to life once more. The car began to move, slowly at first, as if it was testing her reaction. Mrs. Jennings' pulse spiked. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let them catch her. Without thinking, she started the engine, her foot slamming on the gas pedal as she tore out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. But as she sped down the road, she couldn't shake the feeling that the car behind her was still there, following her. The shadows of the streets seemed to close in around her, and every turn she took felt like another step deeper into the unknown. Her mind raced with questions, with fears. Who was in that car? Who was behind all of this? And, most importantly, why was she being targeted? As she glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart sank. The car was still there, just a few feet behind her, its headlights cutting through the night like a predator closing in on its prey. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a coincidence. She wasn't just being followed. She was being hunted. Every twist and turn in the road led her deeper into a nightmare that seemed to have no end. And with each passing moment, the mystery only grew darker. The questions mounted, and the sense of danger grew more suffocating with every mile she drove. Mrs. Jennings knew one thing for sure now. She was no longer just a teacher trying to protect her students. She was in the midst of something much bigger, something far more dangerous, and she didn't know how to escape it. Her only option now was to keep driving, to keep running, even though she had no idea where to go or who she could trust. Just when Mrs. Jennings thought she was reaching the end of her tether, something happened that shattered everything she thought she knew. Her mind had been racing, consumed by the fear of being followed, the constant, gnawing suspicion that something, was closing in on her. She had become convinced that she was up against something dark, something insidious, maybe even a conspiracy bigger than herself. The cryptic warnings, the mysterious figures, the relentless pursuit, each piece of the puzzle had been carefully placed in front of her like a trap she couldn't escape. But as she continued to speed through the winding streets, desperately trying to outrun the shadows, a shocking truth began to unfurl before her eyes, one that threatened to turn everything she'd experienced upside down. The next few minutes were a blur of headlights, tire screeches, and the pounding rhythm of her heart. But as she turned a sharp corner, something caught her attention in the rearview mirror. The car, the one that had been tailing her relentlessly, wasn't behind her anymore. It was gone. Her pulse slowed just a fraction, but her nerves were still on edge. The relief was brief, so fleeting that it didn't feel real. Maybe the driver had given up. Maybe she had managed to lose them. But then, her phone buzzed again, snapping her from her racing thoughts. She had barely gotten a chance to glance at it before she heard something that made her blood run cold. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't distorted this time, wasn't muffled or menacing. It was clear, unmistakable, and deeply familiar. "Jen," the voice said, soft but urgent. "You're in over your head." The voice, it couldn't be. She froze as a chill ran through her entire body. It was Max. She recognized it instantly. But it was different. There was an edge to it, a tone she had never heard before, like he was no longer the trusted colleague she had once confided in. A sinking feeling took hold of her chest as she realized that the Max she thought she knew might not be the man she thought he was. "You've got it all wrong," he continued, his voice almost a whisper now. "You're being set up, Jen. The people after you." He hesitated for a moment, as if trying to gather the right words. "They want you to believe that this is about the backpack, about the kids, but it's not. It's about me." The words hit her like a slap to the face. She felt dizzy, her breath shallow as the realization clawed at her mind. Max, the man she had trusted, had warned her to stop digging. He was the one pulling the strings all along. Every piece of the puzzle, every cryptic clue, every cryptic message, it had all led to this moment. He was the one behind it, he was the one orchestrating the chaos. She had been so focused on the people chasing her, so distracted by the web of lies and threats, that she hadn't even seen the truth staring her in the face. "Why didn't you tell me, Max?" she demanded, her voice shaking. She wasn't sure if she wanted answers, or if she was too afraid to hear them. "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" But Max's response was not what she expected. "You think you've been investigating the wrong things, Jen. You think you've been looking for answers that don't exist. The truth is, you've been looking at this all wrong. I didn't want you to get involved because this thing we're both part of, it's dangerous. And it's too late to turn back now." Mrs. Jennings' head spun. Everything she had thought she understood, the warnings, the clues, the chase, it all crumbled like dust in her hands. Max had known all along. He had been involved in something far bigger, and she had been just a pawn in his game. "But I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean?"
What are you talking about?
"Your investigation, the backpack, the threats, it's all connected to something I never wanted you to uncover. But now it's too late. It's been too long," Max said, his voice thick with regret. "The people you're dealing with, they're not just some random criminals, Jen. This goes way beyond that. And they're not going to stop until they've taken everything from you." It felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Her mind raced, trying to piece together everything she had learned so far, but nothing made sense anymore. Had Max been manipulating her this whole time? Had the messages, the warnings, everything he'd said to her, been part of a larger plan to keep her in the dark? She felt betrayed, and the anger began to bubble up inside her. But at the same time, fear gripped her heart. If Max was telling the truth, and what if he was? Then she was in even deeper than she realized. And then, just when she thought she couldn't take any more, the line went dead. For a moment, she just sat there, stunned, unable to move. Her mind tried to process the enormity of what she had just heard, but it couldn't. It couldn't make sense of the idea that the person she had trusted most in this entire mess was the one responsible for the danger she was in. She needed answers. She needed to find out the truth, but the deeper she dug, the more it felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet, pulling her further into a world she couldn't escape from. The people who were following her, the cryptic messages, the missing pieces, all of it now seemed part of something much darker, much more sinister than she had ever imagined. And just when she thought she had hit rock bottom, she received another message. This time it wasn't from Max. It wasn't from Rachel. It wasn't even from anyone she knew. The text was simple, almost too simple to believe. "The answers you seek are closer than you think. But don't trust anyone." The message sent a chill down her spine as she stared at the screen. Who was this? What did they know? And why had they sent it to her now, when everything had already spun so wildly out of control? The twist was clear. Whatever she thought was happening, whatever she believed to be the truth, had been a lie all along. And now, the clock was ticking. The walls were closing in, and she was running out of time. As the hours passed, the weight of everything Mrs. Jennings had discovered began to settle over her like a suffocating cloud. The world around her had started to twist in strange and unnerving ways, and the very fabric of her reality felt as though it was slowly unraveling. Each piece of new information had only deepened the chaos, throwing her into a maze where every door seemed to lead to more questions, and every turn carried the threat of more danger. The feeling of being watched, of not knowing who she could trust, had become a constant presence in her life, as unshakable as her own shadow. Max's cryptic words echoed in her head, over and over, each repetition bringing with it a sense of dread that she couldn't escape. The people after her weren't just ordinary criminals, he had said. They weren't just trying to silence her or control her. They were after something bigger. And if she didn't stop, if she kept digging, there was no telling what could happen. She had always prided herself on seeking the truth, but the reality of what that truth might mean now felt like a weight she couldn't bear. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She was trapped, caught in a game she never asked to play, and every choice she made seemed to lead her further into a corner. But the worst part? The people she thought she could trust, her closest allies, were the ones who had been keeping secrets, and the deeper she dug, the more she realized she might not even know them at all. Rachel, for instance. Rachel, her best friend, had always been the person she turned to when everything seemed too much. She had been there through thick and thin, through the late-night talks and the tough decisions.
But now?
Now, Rachel's sudden silence, her evasiveness, when Mrs. Jennings tried to ask about the strange messages, only added to the growing sense of paranoia. Rachel was hiding something, and the longer Mrs. Jennings allowed herself to ignore it, the more dangerous it became. But confronting her? That meant putting everything on the line. What if Rachel really was involved? What if she was the one orchestrating this whole thing, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The thought was too much to bear. Rachel wasn't just a colleague or a friend. She was a part of Mrs. Jennings' life, a constant in an ever-changing world. Confronting her would mean tearing down that entire foundation, and if Rachel really was guilty, if she had been complicit all along, then that would make Mrs. Jennings just as much a part of the deception as anyone else. But there was no time for hesitation. A new message had arrived, this time from an unknown number, with a chilling directive. You have 24 hours. After that, the consequences will be irreversible. We know everything about you. We know your every move. You have a choice. Stop digging, and we'll let you go. Continue, and we'll make sure your investigation is the last thing you ever finish. The ultimatum hit her like a punch to the stomach. She didn't have the luxury of time, of thinking things through. She had to act. The option to back out, to give up and walk away, seemed almost reasonable at first. She could protect herself. She could retreat from the web of lies, pull herself away from the abyss that was threatening to swallow her whole. But what about the truth? What about the lives that were at stake? She couldn't let it go. She couldn't let herself be manipulated like this, not again. Yet the threat was clear. This wasn't a game. It wasn't just about her safety anymore. There were consequences, real consequences, for every step she took closer to the truth. If she made the wrong move, if she pushed too far, it could all be over. And the thought of losing everything, of losing the people she loved, of losing herself, was almost too much to bear. In the midst of the chaos, a familiar voice shattered the silence of her phone. It was Rachel finally calling back. Her voice was strained, almost frantic. Jen, I need to talk to you. I know what's going on. I know why you've been digging. Mrs. Jennings felt a surge of relief, quickly followed by a deep sense of dread. There was no turning back now. The pieces were falling into place, but they weren't the pieces she expected. Rachel's voice trembled as she continued. I'm sorry, Jen. I didn't want you to get hurt, but I couldn't protect you from this. I was trying to shield you, but it's too late for that now. They're watching both of us. You can't trust anyone, not even me. The words hit her like a cold wave. What did Rachel mean? Was she confessing to something? Or was this all part of some twisted game? Mrs. Jennings' mind raced as she tried to make sense of it, but the more Rachel spoke, the less clear it became. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if she were afraid to hear the answer. There's no good choice here, Jen, Rachel said, her voice thick with regret. But you're in too deep. You have to make a decision right now. You have to choose. They've already made up their mind. There's no going back. The desperation in Rachel's voice sent a chill through her veins. She was being pushed into a corner, forced to make a choice she never wanted to face. But there was something Rachel wasn't saying, something in her tone that made Mrs. Jennings feel like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to be pushed off. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice breaking. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice barely audible. You have 24 hours. If you keep going, they'll destroy everything. If you back off, we'll still be safe. But you need to make the choice. And make it fast. The choice was hers. But the weight of it felt unbearable. There was no easy way out. Every path led to a different kind of destruction. And as Mrs. Jennings stared down at the phone in her hand, knowing that she couldn't stop now, she understood the truth. This wasn't just about the mystery anymore. This wasn't just about uncovering secrets. This was about survival. And survival meant facing the impossible. Mrs. Jennings felt like the walls were closing in around her. With every passing minute, the sense of dread grew stronger, more overwhelming, and the reality of what was unfolding hit her with brutal clarity. She had always considered herself a rational person, someone who understood the importance of facts and evidence, but now, facts seemed like nothing more than a fleeting dream. The truth she had been chasing had spiraled into something so vast, so tangled, that she couldn't even see the beginning of the end. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, it was a message from an unknown number, a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her. Except it wasn't just any random code. It was the same one Max had mentioned, the one linked to the dark web network that was pulling the strings behind everything.
Panic gripped her chest.
This wasn't just a local conspiracy or a group of rogue individuals trying to cover up something. This was a well-orchestrated operation. And the worst part? She had been right in the middle of it all along, unwittingly feeding the fire with her own investigation. As the realization hit, her mind scrambled to piece together the connections she had missed. All the cryptic messages, the sudden disappearances, the people who had warned her to stop, all of it pointed to a force so powerful, so far-reaching, that it was more than a conspiracy. It was a network of corruption so entrenched that it seemed impossible to expose without bringing everything down on top of her. And then came the breaking point. Rachel's call, which had seemed like a cry for help, suddenly felt like a cold, calculated warning. Mrs. Jennings' hands trembled as she listened to Rachel's voice, the panic evident in her words. "Jen, they know. They know you're getting close. I didn't want you involved, but now you've crossed a line." The words barely made sense through the buzzing in her ears. She had trusted Rachel, believed in her as the one person who would never betray her.
But now?
Now Rachel's hesitation spoke volumes. "What do you mean? Who knows?" Mrs. Jennings demanded, barely keeping her voice steady. "Who's behind this?" Rachel's voice faltered. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But you've got to leave.
Now.
This is bigger than you think. It's bigger than me." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mrs. Jennings in stunned silence. The weight of Rachel's words crashed over her like a tidal wave, and she felt the full extent of the trap she was caught in. The conspiracy was massive, global even. The people she'd thought were just part of the investigation, those who had tried to help her, were not innocent bystanders. They were players in a game much darker than she had ever imagined. Her own safety was no longer the primary concern. The truth was, she had to get to the bottom of this no matter the cost. She could no longer rely on Rachel, not after the fear in her voice. She couldn't afford to trust anyone. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an untraceable source. The message was brief but chilling. "It's too late. They've already set the trap." Mrs. Jennings' heart raced. Who was they? And why did it feel like she was already being hunted? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze, staring at the door as though it might open by itself. Her mind raced. Was it someone from the conspiracy? Someone sent to silence her before she could reveal the truth? She couldn't wait to find out. There was no time. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag, stuffed her phone into her pocket, and bolted out of the back door, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she ran down the alley behind her building, her mind was clouded with questions. Who could she trust? How much of her investigation was part of a bigger plan she had never even seen coming? Was Rachel part of it? Had Rachel been a pawn all along? The alley seemed endless, the walls towering over her as if trying to close in. In the midst of her frantic escape, something caught her eye, just for a second, a flash of movement in the shadows. Someone was watching her. Someone she didn't recognize, but whose presence sent a chill down her spine. Was it a stranger? Or was it someone she had seen before? Someone connected to the web of secrets that had ensnared her life? Before she could process the thought, her phone buzzed again. This time, a new message flashed on the screen. "You're running out of time. Don't trust anyone." She didn't have to be told twice. She was being hunted, and there was no place to hide. The trap was closing in, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter who stood in her way. With no clear allies left, she had to trust her instincts and make a choice. Keep running, or turn back and face whatever forces had set this deadly game in motion. But even then, she knew there would be no easy way out. Mrs. Jennings had crossed a point of no return, and every move she made now could either expose the conspiracy or bury her in its depths forever. As the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the alley, she had to make a decision. Could she outrun her past, or had she already played her hand in a game she could never win? Everything she thought she knew had just been shattered, and now the stakes were higher than ever. The walls were closing in, and she couldn't afford to lose any more time. Mrs. Jennings stumbled through the dark alley, the weight of everything pressing down on her like 100-pound stone, her heart racing as the sound of footsteps behind her grew louder. She knew she was being followed, but she couldn't tell whether it was friend or foe. She had no choice but to keep moving, every breath short, every step desperate. The message on her phone burned in her mind. "You're running out of time. Don't trust anyone." She had no one left to trust. Not Rachel. Not the people she thought were allies. The shadows around her seemed to close in, and a voice in the back of her mind whispered, "This is it. You're not getting out of this." She turned a corner and found herself in a dead end, the cold brick wall blocking her path. Panic surged as she whipped around, searching for an escape. The footsteps were louder now, growing closer. Her breathing quickened, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She was trapped. But just as her mind spun with fear, a figure emerged from the darkness, a man, tall and dressed in a dark coat. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but his presence alone was enough to freeze her in place. He didn't need to speak for Mrs. Jennings to know who he was. It was him, the one behind everything. The puppet master who had orchestrated the conspiracy she had been chasing. He stepped closer, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Mrs. Jennings had been running for her life, chasing clues, following false leads, only to end up here, cornered and powerless. But she refused to let him see her fear. She straightened up, her voice trembling but firm. "What do you want from me?" The man's lips curled into a smile that was equal parts condescending and cold. "What I've always wanted, Jen," he said in a low voice. "The truth. The whole truth." Her stomach churned. She had heard that voice before. His words, laced with a sense of finality, hit her harder than she expected. He wasn't just some bystander. He was the orchestrator of this twisted game. He had been pulling strings, manipulating people, and watching her chase shadows. He was the one who had set her on this path. "How long?" she asked, barely above a whisper, her voice betraying the anger and disbelief that surged through her. "How long have you been watching me?" The phone calls, the messages. Rachel. Was she part of it from the start? The man took another step forward, the air between them thick with tension. Rachel was never part of this. She was a distraction. A pawn in a game she couldn't even begin to understand. You were the key to all of it. Your investigation, your obsession with the truth. It was exactly what I needed. His words sent a shockwave through her. The realization hit her with such force that her knees nearly gave out. All this time, she had thought Rachel was trying to help her, but she had been a pawn in his scheme. He had manipulated everything, right down to the smallest detail. The truth wasn't something Mrs. Jennings had been seeking. It was something he had wanted her to uncover. A truth designed to pull her deeper into his web. "You think this ends here?" Mrs. Jennings demanded, her voice cracking with a mix of rage and fear. "You think I'll just let you win?" The man's smile widened, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "You've already lost, Jen. I've been ahead of you the whole time. Everything you've learned, every clue you've discovered, it was all part of my plan. I gave you just enough to make you think you were in control. But in the end, you'll be the one who takes the fall." Her heart raced as she realized the full scope of his control. It wasn't just the conspiracy that had driven her mad. It was him, pulling the strings, controlling everything. She had been a puppet in his show, and he had made sure she would fall into the trap. But she wouldn't give up. Not yet. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "You've made a mistake," she said, her voice low and steady. "I'm not backing down. I'll expose you, no matter what it takes." For a brief moment, the man's expression faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "You think you can stop me?" he asked, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you can take down a network this powerful? You're nothing but a small piece in a much larger game." Just as Mrs. Jennings took a step toward him, determined to make him pay for everything he had done, the unexpected happened. A car screeched to a halt just behind her, the headlights blinding her for a second. Before she could react, the man turned sharply, his hand flying up to signal someone she couldn't see. She spun around to see two figures step out of the car, their faces masked. It was over. She had been so focused on him that she hadn't seen the trap closing in from all sides. The man wasn't just the mastermind. He had an army behind him, and now it was too late to fight back. "Get in the car," one of the masked figures barked. Mrs. Jennings didn't move. She couldn't. But before she could even process her next thought, a cold voice from the man behind her spoke once more. "You should have walked away, Jen. It would have been easier." In that moment, the ground beneath her seemed to disappear. A sharp pain shot through her head, and her world tilted. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the man's smile, the smile of someone who knew he had won. The truth had been right in front of her the entire time, but now it was slipping through her fingers like sand. She had uncovered the conspiracy, but she was too late to stop it. And as she slipped into unconsciousness, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something much, much darker. When Mrs. Jennings finally awoke, she was no longer in the alley. The cold, damp air had been replaced by sterile, artificial warmth. She was lying in a hospital bed, the sound of a faint beeping monitor to her left reminding her that she was still alive. But the question was, how much longer would she be? The man, the ones behind him, had been relentless, and now she had no idea if she could trust anyone. Her body ached, her head throbbing, but her mind was sharp. She had been out for days, and while her physical wounds would heal, the scars left by everything she had uncovered would stay with her forever. A soft knock on the door brought her attention to the figure standing at the threshold. It was Rachel. She entered quietly, her face a mixture of guilt and relief. She hadn't seen Rachel in days. Not since that night when everything had spiraled out of control. The weight of their complicated history hung in the air, but it wasn't the past they were here to confront. It was the future, and whatever came next. "I'm sorry, Jen," Rachel said quietly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know what they were planning. I never should have gotten involved." Mrs. Jennings sat up slowly, her body still weak, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had to know the truth. "Who are they, Rachel? Who was behind all of this?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but the urgency was clear. Rachel looked down, then stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room, making sure no one else was listening. "They were bigger than we realized," Rachel admitted, her voice filled with regret. "They had everyone. People you never would have suspected. Even the police. I thought I could protect you, Jen, but I was just as trapped as you." Mrs. Jennings felt a wave of emotion crash over her. Betrayal, anger, confusion. Rachel had been caught in the same web, and yet there was something about her tone, the way she spoke now, that made Mrs. Jennings want to believe her. The time for questions, for digging into secrets, was past. What mattered now was what came next. "I can't go back to my old life, Jen," Rachel said, her voice barely audible now. "None of us can. They'll be watching us forever. But I'll do everything I can to make it right. We can expose them, you and me." Mrs. Jennings considered her words carefully. In some ways, Rachel was right. They were both marked now, targets in a game they didn't choose. But the idea of letting it go, of pretending that this nightmare had never happened, felt impossible. She had seen too much, learned too much. There was no going back. "Then let's finish it," Mrs. Jennings said, a new fire in her eyes. "If we're going to take them down, we do it together. No more running. No more hiding." Rachel nodded, but the heaviness in her expression was undeniable. There was a cost to everything they'd uncovered, a price they both knew they would have to pay. But what was the alternative? To let the truth die with them? To let the conspiracy fester in the dark? As they spoke, the doors of the hospital room opened again, and a man in a suit entered, his face obscured by sunglasses. He didn't announce himself, didn't say a word, he didn't need to. Mrs. Jennings could feel the tension in the room shift, the air becoming thick with the weight of what was to come. Rachel stiffened, her face draining of color. It was him, the man who had orchestrated everything. His presence was a silent warning, a reminder that the game wasn't over, no matter how much they wanted it to be. "Leave her alone," Rachel said sharply, standing between Mrs. Jennings and the man. The voice was strong, defiant, but Mrs. Jennings could see the fear flicker in her eyes. She wasn't sure if it was for herself or for them both. But the man didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood still, his cold gaze sweeping across the room. "It's over," the man said, his voice icy and calm. "You can't win, Rachel. You never will. You were never part of the plan. You never were supposed to be." Rachel's eyes darted to Mrs. Jennings, her face pale, but there was something resolute in her expression now. They had no choice but to face him. There was no more running, no more hiding behind false hopes or empty promises. They had fought long enough, and whatever came next would be the final test of everything they'd endured. But just as the tension reached its peak, another voice broke the silence. A voice Mrs. Jennings hadn't expected to hear again, Detective Harris. He stepped into the room, his badge visible, his expression grim. But the look he gave Mrs. Jennings wasn't the usual mask of authority. It was something else, something darker. He had been in on it all along. The betrayal wasn't just in the people closest to her, it was everywhere. The people who were supposed to protect her had been the ones pulling the strings all along. Rachel's eyes darted to Mrs. Jennings, her face pale, but there was something resolute in her expression now. They had no choice but to face him. There was no more running, no more hiding behind false hopes or empty promises. They had fought long enough, and whatever came next would be the final test of everything they'd endured. But just as the tension reached its peak, another voice broke the silence. A voice Mrs. Jennings hadn't expected to hear again, Detective Harris. He stepped into the room, his badge visible, his expression grim. But the look he gave Mrs. Jennings wasn't the usual mask of authority, it was something else, something darker. He had been in on it all along. The betrayal wasn't just in the people closest to her, it was everywhere. The people who were supposed to protect her had been the ones pulling the strings all along. "Don't listen to him," Harris said, his voice low. "He's been manipulating you both. The whole operation was a front. You've only scratched the surface. You think you're done with this? You think you're safe?" He looked from Rachel to Mrs. Jennings, then back to the man in the suit. "You have no idea how deep this goes." Mrs. Jennings felt a chill run down her spine. The conspiracy, the lies, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. She had always known there was something more lurking beneath the surface, but now, faced with the full weight of it all, the enormity of the situation was almost too much to comprehend. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What had she really uncovered? Who could she trust now? As the scene unfolded, the camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the determination and the fear etched into every line of her expression. In that moment, Mrs. Jennings knew the fight wasn't over. It might never be. The truth, the one she had spent so much of her life seeking, had just opened up a door to something far darker, far more dangerous than she ever imagined. And as the screen slowly faded to black, the question lingered, was she truly ready to face whatever came next? The story was far from over.